Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to rig an entire character and put in some inverse kinematics chain. What I'll do is work with the character we've already used and get you from the point of a static model to an animated character that's walking along with a rig inside it. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so here's our character. We have to put an armature exactly in the center of this area here. So Shift S, cursor to selected. You have to have the object selected. Now you add an armature, a single bone. So there's the armature in the middle of the character. It's not visible in here, so we just turn on over at this panel over here, turn on X-ray. So we now can see the character armature inside the character. It's only a single bone for now. We'll leave that alone. Now in edit mode for the armature, we can start moving this armature around to suit the character's proportion. So I put the root of the bone at the base of the hips and then extrude using E up to the top of the chest. So roughly in line with the shoulders. And then in a side view I'll extrude one for the neck and extrude one for the head. So that's our center backbone. Now we have to turn on the side menu here, T for the side menu. Scroll up to the top and options, we want to turn on axis mirror, X-axis mirror, because now we're going to start our arm and our leg extrusions, but we want it mirrored. So we Shift E to create that one, and we Shift E to create the beginning of that. Now we don't need that turned on, or if we leave that on, we just hide that menu, leave it on. And now from here on we want to extrude down for each of the chains of limbs. One is the arm, and we want to make sure that the elbow is placed a little bit towards this side of the mesh, this side of the mesh there, so that the arm has some bend in it, which is always good for a bone chain to have some initial bend in it rather than being very straight. The one thing I'll do is add a hand, extrude the hand. We could continue to add some fingers, which either is a few ways to work with fingers. We can either extrude, so the starting point of a finger is there, and there. Each finger begins at those little crosses, but so I have to get a bone across to there to start the finger chain. Now either I can extrude over to that point and then keep extruding for that finger and then just delete that bone. So that bone is now linked to that bone, but it is offset because you can see there's a dotted line there. That means that bone is offset, but still linked. It has to be linked to the hand. So I'll just align these bones properly for the thumb. Very quick. The next one will mean an extrusion to this point, the beginning of the knuckle, and continuing along I want to create another bone chain for that finger. Keep in mind that each of these fingers has a orientation, and using Control R I can change the orientation of the bone chain using Control R. So I just want to make sure that the front face, this face here of the bone is facing the front of the mesh. Okay, so now I can delete that bone there because I don't need it. I will extrude another bone just in order to begin the finger, the central finger, extrude to the knuckle and extrude down to the end of the finger, the tip of the finger. Just reposition these bones, just tweak my bone roll so that the bone is facing in the correct direction. Then I can delete that bone so that the bone is linked, you can see from that dotted line. So in continuation of that work, just extruding to continue the bone chains, and delete that bone, change the bone roll, and adjust the position of that bone so that it's up towards where the knuckle would be. That bone roll needs to be facing more like that. So grab that bone again, extrude out to where the pinky will start. That's where the pinky will start roughly. And now extrude for the knuckle, extrude for the rest of the finger. I'm only having 2 bone fingers for now, because I don't need in this animation exercise, I'm not going to need any more flexibility of my fingers, but your characters might need more flexible or less flexible fingers. It depends upon what character you're rigging for. Alright, so that'll do for the hands. Now continuing along the legs, I've got much simpler legs. That's where the hip bone will start approximately, in the center of the character, hip. And now extrude for the knee, extrude for the calf, and extrude for the foot, and then extrude for the toe. Now I just want to make sure those bones are in alignment. That's the ankle there, so that has to be in the center of the mesh. That bone needs some bone roll adjustment just to line it back up with, and that bone also needs some bone adjustment. A great idea is to put the bone towards the front of the knee, not towards the back of the knee, because if you push the bone chain towards the front, there is some bend in that bone. The bone has bend in it, and so it's a great idea to have a little bit of initial bend in your bone chain, so that the inverse kinematic solution will know how to bend that knee properly. Alright, so just positioning that bone towards the front so there is some bend there, and that's my ankle, and there's my toe bone, lines up with the foot, and we're done. That's the skeleton. Okay, now the first thing I want to do is turn on pose mode, and I'm going to select my so that the bone can be posed. You can just quickly test your mesh there to see if everything's linked correctly. If I move that around, you can see that that's broken. So back into edit mode, select those 2 bones, and then this final bone here, and hit Control P, and I want that to keep offset, so that in pose mode, the whole bone chain gets taken along, so that those 2 bones are effectively linked to that bone with offset. Okay, so there's our skeleton. The next thing we want to do is make sure our eyes go for the right. So select those eye mesh, and then select that bone. That skeleton will need to be in pose mode. So I select that bone, and then I Control P, and I want to link to bone, so that those eyeballs are now linked to the bone. Now the next thing I want to do is link the mesh to the bone system. So I select the mesh, then select the bone system. Doesn't matter if it's in pose mode or object mode. Then I hit Control P, automatic weights. So now the mesh is bound by an armature modifier. You can see on the mesh's modifier there is now a new armature modifier, that there, and that armature modifier will allow you to move this bone chain around accordingly. Great, so that's a quick rig. We'll just do a quick test in pose mode to make sure each of those bones moves. That's all moving correctly. It's all moving correctly, and it seems to be fairly well rigged for a forward kinematics. Now when we move, I'll just quickly put a box down so you can see a floor plane, so a character will stand on the floor. when we move that character up and down, we want the feet to stay on the floor. That's the floor, so we want the feet to stay there, but at the moment these leg bones don't have that option because it's a forward kinematics chain. We want to put an inverse kinematics chain in. So the first step for an inverse kinematics chain is for us to disconnect this bone. We have to Alt-P, clear parent, Alt-P, disconnect bone. So in pose mode, the bones are completely broken. We've completely broken that link so that those bones are disconnected from this bone. That's the first step. Alright, the next step is to select the calf and go over in pose mode. We have to be in pose mode. We have to go over to the bone constraints and choose inverse kinematics. And that puts an inverse kinematics onto that chain, but we have to plug in some values now. So we're going to choose the armature. We have to choose the bone. Where's the bone? Well, it's the foot bone. So we have to make sure that this foot bone is named correctly so we can find it. So there's the name. Copy. And we'll go back to this and we'll paste it in there. There it is there. So with that foot bone is now pasted into this area here. Now the next thing we need to do is set that to 2. That's very important. That needs to set to 2, because if you don't set this to 2, the bone chain won't be able to know how far to calculate. If we set it to 3, you can see that the whole hip starts to go for the ride here. We don't want that. We want only this bone chain to calculate to the hip, so there only needs to be set to 2. Alright, so if it's a 2-joint leg, if it's a 3-joint leg, you might need to change it to 3. Alright, so we have some, while we're also getting some mesh deformation here. I'll fix that now. To fix that, you just get rid of that armature modifier and rebind it to the mesh, automatic weights. So hopefully, oh, it's not, maybe because of the mirror modifier. Alright, if we apply the mirror modifier, get rid of the armature, rebind the mesh, automatic weights, now it should be fine. So that leg is now using inverse kinematics to hold the foot down on the floor. So we just quickly do it again for the next leg. Select that bone, go to bone constraint, inverse kinematics, select the armature, then we select the bone name, so we have to make sure we know what that bone name is. There it is. Just rename it to foot so we can find it. Go back here, find foot. You can type it in. We want the right foot. So now that's selected, and then we want to set that for 2. Okay, close some menus. There we have a complete IK solution. Great. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do with this IK solution is set up a walk cycle. We'll walk on the spot, so we need to open up a timeline. So click on the little triangle to open up a timeline. So we have a time bar there. And the next thing we also want to do is set the time to be 24 frames long. Home. So we have a 24 frame walk cycle. Okay. The other viewport we want is a dope sheet. So drag out another one and set a dope sheet, because at the moment we don't have any keys in there, but this is where the little keys will work when we start operating on our dope sheet. The next thing we need to do is turn on this little key down here, and that means it will set keys automatically. So from a front view, let's go to our first frame, which happens to be 1 to 24. 1 to 24 is actually a 23 frame cycle, so we want 0 to 24 is 25 frame cycle. We want a 24 frame cycle, so leave that alone. Just remember about 0 and the end frame, whether or not that's usable for you, as your character might want to walk faster or slower than that, so you have to make that time longer by adjusting this and this value. Alright, so first pose for any walk cycle is the contact point, and we'll just set that contact point up. The contact point, I'll just push the arms in like that. I'll get myself a new window so I can see the character from its side and the front at the same time. The contact point is where the heel will strike the ground first. So we're just posing this character, and you can see there's a little keyframe appearing in this window. So that means the character is now keyframed. That little key won't appear unless that's turned on. Okay, so the arm is opposite to the leg. We'll relax these fingers in a little bit. Obviously we don't want too much spaced fingers out for the sake of a relaxed walk cycle. Okay. Once we have let's just key all of those by pressing I and then only rotation. Once we have that, we are able to copy the pose and then paste it onto the opposite side of the character by pasting a mirror. So all I did was copy that pose and then paste it to this side of the character, so that I'll undo that. All I did was copy the pose and then paste it to the other side, and so the other side has that same pose as well, which is good for opposite sided bones. It won't work on the central column, but for opposite sided bones it's great to get poses that you may have already made with your hands. Alright, so that's my contact pose, and in order to make it a looping cycle we want to copy that pose up to frame 24. We'll go back to frame 1 and keyframe everything, so location, rotation and scale, and then just copy that up to frame 24, which is about there, so that we know that that frame is the same as frame 1, and so it will loop. Then go to the center frame, which in this case is 13. If I was to move my keys down the timeline 1, turn it to frame 23 and 0, I just reset my timing, it would be frame 12. That would be the opposite. Whatever is the halfway point. The halfway point is the opposite pose. So we could either use a combination of mirror posing or just do the manual pose. I prefer it if, as students, you get used to posing your character quickly, because it's important to be able to identify which bone you're working on and what does it do on your character's rig. So I'll start playing with the pose here. I haven't done anything with the hips on the other one. So you can start to see the characters animating. I'll have to repose I'll have to select all the bones and Shift D to copy that up the timeline. So that is the beginning pose, and that head has to face forward. Okay, so we have the beginning pose, which is called the contact points. The contact points for the right foot, the left foot, and the contact point for the right foot. So we try to make these strong poses as best we can by and anytime you adjust the first pose, you have to select all the bones and select the keys and copy it up to the timeline. Alright, so that's our walking pose. We want to turn that to AV sync so that it walks at full speed. Obviously that's just the contact points. Now the next pose we have to put in is the passing pose. So which foot is passing which foot? Well, this foot's passing that foot, so we'll lift that foot up, lift up the hips, put the other foot onto the ground where it's supposed to be. Maybe the hips came up too high. Okay, that's the idea. The passing pose is where the foot passes the other foot, and then that's the next contact point. The next passing pose, this is the foot coming through, so we have to pose that, lift it a bit, lift the hips and push that other foot down onto the ground, because that foot's supposed to stay onto the ground as this other foot comes through, passes. We're not doing any work on the hips just yet, so I'll try to key some of those in on the passing poses. Okay, so there we have the passing poses. You're starting to get to the beginnings of a walk cycle. That foot there is kind of landing in the wrong angle, so we want to land it like that. Because I'm working on the first pose, I want to make sure that the character's copied up to the end, which is Shift D, copy that key up to the end so it does loop, and that foot goes back, it twists, because I didn't pay any attention to that pose while I was working on it, and because that twists, I have to just adjust those poses from the front view. And that's an acceptable walk cycle at the moment. Now obviously there's some more work I can do on this. It's a very boring walk cycle, it's just contacts and passing pose. So just to add some more screen space, I'll close that up. And the other thing you can do to help you animate, because a lot of this is very busy with bones, I can quickly go to my skeleton and change it to wire. My skeleton panel, properties panel, and I can change it to wire, envelope, B-bone or sticks. Wire is the least messy, so you can see your character as you work. Alright, so the next pose would be the weight pose, the weight where the weight is completely onto the ground. So it does this sort of the weight comes down off that foot, so that's the pose immediately after the contact, and I'll do that on this side of the character as well. So that's 1, 2, 3 frames, halfway between this one and this one. We can put the foot flat to the floor and just a little bit of weight to the left onto that leg, so you can now see the character's got a little bit more weight on its walk cycle when it lands on its weight. That once the foot contacts on the ground, it starts to look like there's a little bit more weight into the character. The other one is another pose you can add is this pose, which is the weight pose. It's about halfway between the passing pose and the next contact. So this is called the raise pose, and you just want to lift the body weight up a little bit, just to keep that foot on the ground, but lift the body weight up, center the weight so that the weight starts to come across the body, and do it on the other side of the body as well. Obviously it has to be about halfway, and there isn't a halfway point there, so we have to push those keys out either one way or the other. So it's a 24 frame cycle. 0 to 23 is 24, so let's figure out where that's gone wrong. 0, that's 4 frames, that's 6 frames, so that's actually 7 frames because you've got 1, so we can push that out 1 more and space that so they're all evenly spaced now. Just got to make sure it's evenly spaced for sake of your ability to see which pose is which. So there we are. We have a character that's walking along. It's a little bit wobbly, so you just have to go and figure out where that wobble is coming from. I have to hide that. And the other one we need to work on there, that's it. I need to just have to push that weight forward. You can see that the hips are moving side to side here in that kind of motion. Okay, and I'll just delete that. You can see, well, where is that? There it is. I'll delete that layer. I actually unwittingly animated that. So you can see the character's head's very stiff, so you just go to each of these frames and pose the head how you would during the animation. It's a little bit stiff, but that's just a matter of playing with these keyframes along here to get yourself a reasonable looking walk cycle. So that's it. That's all we need to do for now, and you can adjust those keyframes as you need.